Today is Samech Tes Tamuz Samech Tes. We're on Hemshek Samech Tes for the River Shab on Amid Mem Dalet.
Right, so we're talking about the union of the Gilui Ayalakus של המיילה מהטבע שבדרך פלא ובמשגלה ליוסיד, even that it'll be nicknames for begidre hateva. And that was what we saw that Va'eshpech in the Lashon in Yoel Anori, what he said Va'eshpech Esruchi al kol bosa v'nibu v'neichem u'v'nei seichem. In other words, that even the Ktanim will be shocked to Inen HaNavua. And we brought Dugmois, U'Misholim from that even Bisman Churban Habayis Hasheni, after the Churban Habayis, there was still quite a long time when there was brought down in the Zohar Kodesh and other places, continuation of that Gilui, the Inen HaNavua, or the Inen Gilui Alakus that there was in the Beis HaMikdash, Afilu on Ktanim and the Ika Tinoikes, what the Zohar Kodesh calls them Yenoika, and the Alter Rebbe bases the whole second Chelik Tanya Periklam and Hay and further on the Lashon of the Yenoika, what means a small boy that he also gave forth and was Megala Seder Satayah. And we saw that was Ainian Miyuchad, which will be Mishchadish Bisman HaGiula, that there will be the Inen HaNavua and Beklau. It's a big sugya, it's not the place to get involved in. Here, the renewal of the Geula, the renewal of the Inen HaNavua as a forerunner to the Inen of the Geula Shleima, and B'meila the Inen of the Gilui HaNavua B'zman HaGeula Shleima. And it's going on at the famous Sikha from the Rebbe on Pasha Shoftim, Tov Shin Nun Aleph, where the Rebbe was Megala the whole Inyan of Gilui HaNavua, Alidei Gedolei Yisrael and Manhiga Yisrael Amitim, and he brought down there the whole concept of the renewal of the Inyan HaGeula from the time of the Talmudei Baal Shem Tov, with a whole big arichas. However, the Nakuda is at Liosid, that will be a Inyan, almost what you might call Rogio, that everybody will be zeicher to the Inyan of Navua. Bedugmas out was Bisman Matan Torah, was put down in the Sefer Chinuch, Shmar Barichas Gedele in his Hakdoma, and also later Benegir to certain mitzvahs that connect with their Seres HaDibros. But he writes of Bashas, the actual Matan Torah, and particularly the Seres HaDibros, then all Yidden was there to the Inen of Gilui HaNavua. And we see that Bisman, that there was only the Navua by a Nevi'im, then we saw that the Hiskalas HaNavuim, Navua, Shahoya HaNavi'im, Shahoya B'der Pele, Lamayla Me'ateva, Ad Shanovi, Mamish halfway down the page, Hoya Tzorik Liyas B'Pchinas Hafshotas Agashmiyas. He had to completely put off all physical aspects of his body and physicality in general in order to gain the Gilui of the Navua. Kameshikosu for Erev Epel Al Ponai. It was written by Yecheskel, and that he saw, and he fell on his face mitzad the Greidel HaGilui and the tremendous what you might call massiveness of the Gilui Alakus Alov and Al Gufay, that he wasn't able to stand. He had to fall in a state of Bittul Hagashmiyas. Rak Moshe Hoya Imed Al Amodei Mipnei Shagam Gufay Hoya B'chinas Bittul Kamei HaNeshama Hoya Mufshetes Min HaGeshem Gaden Mitzada Hagu. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to receive the Navua even when he was standing, and as well known B'chol Zman, B'chol Rega, he was able to be Makabel the Navua, because his Neshama and Guf were not really different in their Etzemina. Even his Guf was Kamoy Inyan HaNeshama, And therefore, even al tzad rogil, then his guf was mufshat mina ageshem. Even mitzad his body, he was mufshat mina ageshem. In other words, that his body wasn't really a physical inyan, and like it's brought down in the Gemara, Masech Tes, that when he was born, Nishmalei Kol Habayis Kulei Eiro, the whole house was full of light. And it's brought down in the Maimon from the Friedrich Rebbe, that means that even his goof was a inyan von Eir. Because when a baby is born, it's only the goof, not yet the knisas anishoma b'shleimas. Philip mitzad gufa, he was also a inyan von Eir. K'moy Eir anishoma, and of course the inyan von Gilui Eir b'chol habayis. Therefore, his guf, even how it was without the knisas neshama v'shleimus, was already ein von Eir. How much more so later when the neshama was b'gufa, that he was able to receive even high gilui elokus and remain completely as he was, because he had no, he was mufshat from physicality. I feel how he was mitzad his guf. But that arouses the very fascinating shaila that nonetheless Moshe Rabbeinu had to have the inyan hakavura. Nonetheless, his body had to be buried after. But that's what we find. Ba'agoy, that the Eibishter himself buried him, but nonetheless it was necessary. The inyan hakavura. Al Chaponim, Begoleh was necessary, the inyan hakavura. It's one on the famous statement of the Rebbe Rashab in the Maimah Apashu Chukas Tov Reish Ayin Tes, where the Rebbe Rashab says that it's a svara to say that he's not there, Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why they weren't able to find the people looking for the cave, the ones who said Lamayla, the ones who Lamayla said it's Lamatla, and the ones who Lamatla said it's Lamayla V'chula, that they weren't able to find it. So the Rebbe Rashab says, but because he's not there, it's mashma that there was a inyan from kavura, so he writes over there, ayin panim lo Torah, shivim panim lo Torah. So, anyway, that's a big discussion. It's not kedai to get into at the moment. Our Moshe Rabbeinu was different, that his guf was also a ruchnias, and therefore he could remain normal and receive the Navua Avali Yosid in the Zman HaGeula, Yezeh Kemo Inyan TV, She'ove B'chinas Eir Eloki HaNelam. In other words, the Eir Eloki, which is mitzad the normal Seder HaBriya, is Nelam from the Briya. In other words, the Eir Shalamayla Mio Elames, and it will come B'chinas TVUs in a natural way. How to call it every day in Yonim, normal, what you might call business as usual. It will come in even from the TVS b'yalodim v'yalodes, even in young children. Akameisha hoya ruach elokim b'doirei shel Adam Harishon, shenikroim b'nei elokim mamish. Well, that's very fascinating. What exactly is the kavanah with the bitui doiroi shel Adam Harishon, and that they were called B'nai Elokim, because the Lashon B'nai Elokim occurs at the end of Seder Bereshis, the Seder Bereshis, and over there it's not talking much about the doir of Adam Harishon, or putting b'pashtas. It could be it's referring back to the doir, but it's referring closer to the doir Hamabel, the doir of Noach, just prior to the bonim of Noach, and describes these beings that are called B'nai Eloi, B'nai Elokim, and the Pashtoni, Hamikra, Rashi, and the Ramban, and others, or they learn that they were like sons of the judges of the people. They were like the aristocracy, you might call very high aristocracy, and their behavior wasn't all El Tada is a Meshubach. So it's hard to understand that they would be called B'nai Elokim, mitzad the Gidl, the Gidl Elakus. It was Ba'asagosam or Ba'etzlam. It's a little hard to understand what is the beer. And I pictured the second pshat in Rashi, Rashi learns that they were really Malachim, or they were Sodim, Shalamayla, but that means a certain Madrega Malachim al Kabbalah. Nonetheless, Rashi says that the Pashtus is that they came down and they had a sort of nafila, and therefore they called it Hanafilim Hoyu Ba'oret, that they couldn't, like it's boring tzidus, that there's certain malachim that they can't really take being down here because it's too physical, too how do you call it, magushim for them, and therefore they have a nafila, and that's what happened with them, etc., etc. So it's a little bit not clear who are these Bnei Elokim, that they were B'doirish Adam Harishan. What maybe that's referring to an earlier stage of these Gilead with the Bnei Elokim, or we could learn like the Ibn Ezra, that the Ibn Ezra learned that they would take a very high sort of people, and they were like Malachim, that were Miskala in this world, but they retained their very high Madrega, and they, as it were, became mixed together with the human species. It's a very interesting concept. Al Haponim, it's a door, that's not quite moving al Tara Seitel Harogil. Anyway, the reason they're called Bnei Elokim was because of their tremendous gilui of Sogas, Selakus, and Navua, which was B'doirei Shel Adam Harishan. And in Impin, Adam Harishan was at least Chelik Mizmani was Began Eden, that was a very high Madrega. So even there occurred a Yerida, Bedukmas like Sport in Nazir, but again, after the Chod and Abayas, there was still a big, his Sneitzer today, got a big sparking of divine Hasoga and Gilui Elion of Elakus. For a period afterwards, that would be similar to the Eden of Dora Shel Adama Harishin.
Didn't Adam only die a few years before Noach?
Huh?
Didn't Adam only die a few years before Noach was born?
Well, yeah, but I mean, there were a lot of other people who came into the world, and it's called their generation prior to Adam Harishin. Adam Harishin was Marek Yomim, but there was a lot of other people who were Marek Yomim. Bismani, Havi Yisami Mimena. Spotam Mesushelik died just after the Mabul started. Mesushelik lived a heck of a long time. So it would appear that Adam Harishin, he may have got close to the Dor of Noach. I'm not exactly sure 100%. Exactly how he fits in. But it's hard to say that was called Doirei Shel Adam Harishin. We already had Doir Enoish, and we had Doir, what do you call him, prior to that. And then there was Chanoik. That's all called their generation, not the generation of Adam Harishin. It may just be that Adam Harishin was Marek Yomim. It's hard to say that that's a Kavanah. Anyway, it could be that the Derech Efshari, we could say that Doirei Shel Adam Harishin means that whole period, right up until. But there were a lot of people who were Marek Yomim after him, and they were mistalik, not all that far from Noach, either after him shortly or before him. So it's hard to say that the Kavanah Adam Harishin is referring to them. But that's what I wanted to suggest at the beginning. We're really talking about that generation, and we call it Bavin Kloi Doirei Shel Adam Harishin. Says the Rebbe, Kain Yiyu Giluye Seidas HaTorah L'chol Echad Ve'echad. Let's say when Mashiach will come, Lo Yiyeh B'Pchinas Seid Ufele Klal, and it won't be a secret or a wonder at all the Giluye Seidas HaTorah after Mashiach will come. Lo Yikemoi Achshol Sheb'Pchinas Seidas Nikroim Niflois, they're called wondrous and separated in Yonim. As well known, the word Pele means separate. It's like by the Nazir, it's written Ish ki Yafli, Lahafri Shneder, Lahem. Rashi said that Lahafli is from Lashon Afrosha, something separated and wondrous. So Torah, Seidas HaTorah called Niflois. Okay, Moshe Kosuv, yeah, David Amela says it in Sefer Tehillim, Gal Einai va'abita niflois mitayra. Selcha, open up, literally, my eyes, reveal my eyes, literally, or take away the cover from my eyes, and I will observe, or I will notice and learn the wondrous aspects of your Torah. Niflois mitayra selcha. And it's well known that's the famous remez in the Kesuvim to the union of Lag Ba'ima. Ki Gal Einai. Gal is the two Asius lag, but that's indicative of Lag Ba'ima Ki Yadua Mufosam. The Rebbe's got a whole mimer, and that brings down Bariches. And the Alter Rebbe also brings it in the Shar Lag Ba'ima and the Siddur, that is a remez to the infant Lag Ba'ima. Lag Ba'ima was the infant Gilui Seidas HaTorah. It's well known that Rashbi, as it brought down in the Yidra Zuta right at the end of the Zohar, that prior to his actual, in inverted commas, his talkit, he revealed all sorts of Seidas and Rosin, Seidas of Seidas, which he hadn't revealed up until that point. So we see that Lag Ba'ima is connected with the union of the wondrous aspects of the Torah. Bechinas Pliois Chochma. They are the wondrousness of Chochma. Now that Lashon Pliois, Chochma is a Lashon in the Sefer Yetzirah, and that refers to the Lamed Beis Nesives. Chochma is well known, it's brought down Kut Torah as what's called Lamed Beis Nesives, and they're called Lamed Beis Nesives Pliois Chochma. In other words, that's the union from Chochma Stimua B'derech Klal. Pliois Chochma, the wondrousness and the withdrawnness of Chochma. And in order to get down to Chochma D'Atzilas or lower than that, you have to have these special little paths, which are similar to the Cyrus that we already had, the union from the Nesive. Al Chaponim, we see that there's things which are called Pliois, wondrous madregas in Chochma, which indicate Chochma Stimua, very high in Yonim, which can't come to the normal asog of the normal person. But Gam Gilui B'chinas HaSoid Hukemoy Ois Umoifes Hukedava Pele. But therefore, the union of somebody who reveals Asoid, then it's like he did a miracle or something. Hukedava Pele, something very, very unusual and rare. Therefore, people make a whole union about it. Baho, yeah, Talia, and one is dependent in the other. Diliyos the etzem hadova who nifla v'nista lazois his galusay who kemoy oiso. What is a ois? A miracle or a sign? That's when you bring something lamaila migilu into gilu. That's the whole concept of it. So when somebody reveals Seidas HaTorah, then that's called a ois ufele, because something which is normally nista has come into revelation. So therefore we see that B'derech Klal, people who are Baalim of Seidas HaTorah are also usually Baalei Nisim. They are able to do Piloim, B'pashtas, and as well known, the connection of the two together. And they were brought down in the Zohar HaKodesh that Rabbi Shimon was able, just through learning the Inim from Pnimis HaTorah, he was able to bring rain when there was no rain. All of the famous story in the Zohar and Pasha Achrei.
How is a nace a gilui? Isn't a nace like a shinai? It's like a change in nature. It's not a revelation.
Yeah. Well, why is it a gilui? Because it's a shinui. In other words, the Eibishter is mishadid. It's called the Lashon in the Gemara, the Marochas HaTeva, the normal inyonim of Teva. So everybody sees that something very unusual has happened, and so they say, well, where does that come from? And they connect that into automatically with the from Gilei Lakus. In other words, that the Eibishter has revealed a certain shinui in what is normally considered unchangeable inyonim. From that we see a higher revelation. But it's true, there are some sort of nisim that they come levushi b'dachei HaTeva, but there are also nisim which are yotzim b'dachei HaTeva. And the Megillah, for example, that's a dogma. The Inim from Nes Purim is a dogma of a Nes which had a certain slapsis in Dachei HaTeva. Avol yosid you aniflois the Seder Torah, or hein atzmom bechinas gilui. They will be in an oven of gilui, hein shaloi yikorei beklal b'shem seid Hashem. It won't be called the secrets of the Eibishter. Eloi nikroim nifeis klal. They won't be called wondrous or separate matters, at all. Ki yovoyu lamata kemoy asogas seichel usfora anushias. Like we have nowadays, that you use your mind to work something out, and that's called a seichel anushias. How do you call it? A human, mitzad the human powers. V'tivias, it'll be because of that, it'll be connected with the koyach hasharayah tiviyim, the etzem natural inclination of the koyachas that we're being given. Mamish. K'moy nigla de tera achshol. Kein mamish yearly osid b'chinas aniflois v'seides ha-toiro. In other words, that just like we're commanded now, and on the contrary, it's a necessity to use your seichel, to use your understanding in the union for nigla de tera, isn't it? Am I right about that? Yeah, so if you're commanded to use your seichel in the union for nigla de tera, then alachas kama v'kama, you have to be mishtadel in the union for pnimis ha-tera, nowadays. We're not holding baliosit over here. So you have to be mishtadel, you have to put your head at it and work at it hard, because these inyonim, like the ultimate seeders, are also nigla. As is well known. There's a certain aspect of siddhas, but they're like the union of what's called siddha musa. Alright, so therefore the Rebbe said that you have to work in nigla de Torah with the seichel anushi. Elias brought down that if somebody learns Gemara or other inyonim in nigla and he doesn't use his seichel, then he's not yoter the day the inyan of limud ha-Torah, and he can't even make a bracha on that limud, as is well known. Mashenkin, if Amoritz is called up to the Torah, to the Torah Shabbat, to Kriyas ha-Torah. Filu ain't yudeh masha koyrim, he doesn't know what they're learning, but he can make a bracha, shebacha banu b'kol amim, he's able to make a bracha because the inyan of Kriyas ha-Torah is just the gilui of the Torah Kamosha. Just like he doesn't understand, really nobody really understands what is the ultimate kavanah for the Talmidei Chachamim. Therefore, he's allowed to make a bracha. Well, when it comes to Torah Shebial Peh, then you have to dafke put your seichel into it, and you're not yoter the limud. And if you hadn't made a bracha on Bilchas Torah prior to that, you wouldn't be able to make a bracha on that limud, because dafke with the inyan and seichel the way we've been given seichel.
What does it mean to put your seichel into the learning? What defines seichel?
That means working hard. It means not just sitting and waiting for somebody to explain it to you, or waiting for it to fall into your mind, but you make an effort with all that you've got to try and appreciate it and deal with the svaras, ask yourself kashas and answer tirutim. That's what it means.
So if you just pick up like a Mishnah and read it, that's not, if you just pick up a Mishnah and read it, that's not
obviously you need to have a certain amount of training. Once a person's got a certain amount of training, then he can't just say, well, I'll just sit and wait. You've got to put your mind to it. It means that you've got to work hard. That's the whole idea of chazorah. When people have already been given certain basic inyanim, then they've got to sit and go over it, but they're pupil, but they're discussion, come up with questions, and ask Rosh Hashiva, v'chuli. That's easy for putting your mind to it. But somebody who just goes over in 5 minutes, he finishes the whole chazorah, and then he goes downstairs to drink a coffee or something. He says, I've already finished the chazorah. Nishtose the kavanah. You understand? The kavanah is to become involved with one's own mind and with one's own seichel. Therefore, he said that we're commanded, davkit nowadays, to use our seichel, svara, and ushiyas, and that's the inyan Torah achshol. Kein mamish yearly osid between us aniflois v'seidei Torah. Will be commanded and to use our minds and to develop and to go further and further in the infinite niflois v'seides, the highest madregas in Roz in Doiraisa, we will deal with them like we're dealing now with Nigla. I don't know what's going to be with all that. What's going to be with all the Nigla? So the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya Perek Kofov. Igeros HaKodesh, chapter 26, Kofov. What's one of Kofov is Communion Shema Havaya. But over there, the Alter Rebbe says near the end of that Igeros, that Liyosid, the Iker will be, the infant Seder Satera will be Begoloi. And he said, we'll know all the Inyonim in Nigla the Torah, Mi Koyach Zeh, we understand the Inyonim in Nimis the Torah, we'll automatically know the Inyonim how they are in Nigla the Torah. And the Yesh Lema, that was the matzah by Matan Torah. The Rebbe says in a place that it's not right to say that by Matan Torah wasn't Gilui Nigla the Torah. That's as if it was Gilui Nigla the Torah. But it was also Gilui Pnimis the Torah. And Otzim Dika Oifen, Alidei Yadu, Kol HaSeder, they Mamela understood and they knew what was the Inyan in that was Benigla the Torah. So Yosid, you'll have to know certain halachas, but you'll know them Mamela if you're an halacha Yid and you learned and you kept halachas how they were supposed to be prior to the information. But if not, then what did he bring over there at the end of the Amei Ha'oretz? The Amei Ha'oretz, they will have to learn Nigla the Torah without learning the Seder Satera, Kedei Lahatish, as the other use the expression of the Kedei Lahatish, as Yenikas HaChitzonim Ve'aklippas Shebohem. But since there's a strong unique to the clippers in the Amei Ha'oretz, they'll have to learn Nigla to get rid of that first, and then they'll be able to appreciate gradually the uniform Pnimis HaTorah. But one is rather sort of tempted to quote the famous quip, but since it might be misunderstood and it might get on these things and later, who knows, at some point in history somebody might hear some of this and they might criticize me, therefore I won't say the quip. Even he wants to know the quip. There's an old saying that what's going to happen to Yosef Lovitz. So to say that the Chassidim are going to have such Giluim that they're going to become tzaddikim or even higher than tzaddikim. They're going to go up in the Chesed to go madreikas. And then what's going to happen to what's going to happen to the Misnagdim? The Misnagdim are going to become Chassidim. The Misnagdim will be and they'll be in the madreiga of tzaddikim. And then what's with the Umas Ha'olam? What's with the Goyim? They're going to become Misnagdim. That's not to be misunderstood, and that's not to be misunderstood that you don't have to learn plenty of Nigla nowadays as well as learning Chassidut. But al Chapanim, there were certain personalities in Lubavitch that they used to devote themselves mainly to Pnimis HaTorah. They used to last most of the time, and we have to say that they were Ma'ain and Midugma from Liozid Lovik. They were very, very early people. They were tremendously medactic for mitzvahs. The case was, how did they know all the Nigla? They must have known from Limud Pnimis HaTorah. But once again, not to take everything I say too literally. Also funny, עכשיו ממש יהיה ליוסי מבחינת נפלאות וסתירת התורה. וכל זה הוא מפני שיסגל ליוסי מבחינת העצם של המעלה ממקור החוכמה. It's going to reveal itself the very etzem. Well, we saw that was the union of oinig, verotzen, how they're higher even than chokhmah stimor. In other words, the union from atik. That's going to reveal itself. V'yeh gilui b'chinas etzem hamahus de'erein seif shalei v'seida v'hadroga klal. So this should be put over some sort of a shir in Yoni Moshiach with Geula or something. this is really mind-boggling what's written here. Yeah, so the Rebbe says that Liyosid Lovay is going to be the Indian of Etchem Hamahus, the Eir Ein Sof. Do you realize what that means? We don't have Hasogas Hamahus nowadays. Kimat Klal, filling Gashmias. We maybe have what's called Matthias Hamahus. You know a little bit about the Mahus. Of a Mamish Mahus is very difficult for us to be masik, particularly in Ruchnias. All we have is what's called Hasogas Hamatiyas. Maybe some very high people have Hasogas Matiyas Hamahus. Yeah. Of a Mahus Mamish, that nobody nowadays. So he says that the Yosid is going to be the Indian from Hasoga in Atzmus. I'm sorry, Etchem Amahus to Eir Ein Sof. In other words, not only we're going to have a soga in Elikus, we're going to have a soga in Mahus, the very essence of Elikus, and in that gufa, in Etchem Elikus Shalamayla Ha'ilamus Etchem Ha'eir Ein Sof. And that's going to be in Azar, even it'll be Miskala to the Adam, how he is, Lamata, in a guf Ashmi, with the koichis of the neshama in the guf Gashmi. Yeshalei b'seid of adroga klau, v'ainu shachokma v'ya soga yeh b'chinas atzmas ein tzei. I mean, the Rebbe goes into a slightly more, what you might call, extreme statement. Previously he said etzem hamahus of Eir Ein Sof. So that's talking about a certain madrega in the oil. In that we'll have etzem hamahus, the hasoga. Yeah. Now he says that the hasoga will be in the atzmus of the Ein Sof, l'chayr, meaning in the oil shalagamri l'mayla mikol medida v'agbola there akol b'atzmusay. And we're going to have hasoga in that, in the atzmus of that oil. Now notice he says hasoga. In other words, it's not a pshat, the world is going to be out and we're going to become like little flying, entities of Ruchnistika Matthias like Malachim or even Lamaylam is there, and we'll be floating around in Elam Salyanim, and early days there will be Masik, the Inim and Mahus Atzmas Ein Sof. Now he says that we're going to be Masik that Lamata, and the expression is Hasoga. What Hasoga means, the power of the mind to understand Al Derech HaRoga, Dainu Bina. Chachma, which will later be Nimshach into Bina. That's a tremendous chiddush to say a thing like that. That's Mamisha. A pillar, the mensch, Kamoisha Hu, with his physical and limited power, what we call a soga, is going to be Masik Etzem Hamahus of divinity. And not stam divinity, but Etzem Hamahus of divinity in a Madrega Nailis Peyesa. So he didn't even, he's still doozing over his book over there, and he continues to dooze away. I would have thought at least that somebody would have jumped up or looked a little bit over their glasses or something, and they'd go and once upon a time I would have had guys getting up, walking around the room or opening windows and hanging outwards, and we used to have Balayas pilots. Like the famous Siddim from the Rav Kaliski of Oid, Talmidei HaMagid. They used to, by davening, they used to make hoodies on the floor, and they used to lay on the floor and chuckle and go and listen to Tamuz. The Alter Rebbe wasn't so in favor. The Middle Rebbe was very not in favor. And that the Alter Rebbe had a big difference with some of the Talmidei HaMagid about it. Oh, yeah, that's a shout. Differences. So, at least a little bit of his plan. I don't expect you all to lay out on the floor like the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe had a certain trace of it. The truth is, you can't say that he didn't. The Alter Rebbe also had a certain trace of it. But Ad Kei Kach by all his followers that they should be rolling around. During davening, he wasn't all that quite in favor. So, you guys, I don't know, it's hard to sort of turn you on a little bit. So anyway, says the Rebbe, V'asoga yiyeh b'chinas atzmas, Ein Sof, Zehu ma shachokma tiye bebchinas ayin de keser. In other words, we saw before at the beginning of the page and prior to that chokma, the way it is now, is a form of a yesh. A chokma mi ayin timotzei. Yes, chokma comes out. Bebchinas koyach hatzeimer, bechokma stimor, and it comes down through law of bechinas. And it actually comes in a form of yesh min ayin, a chokma mi ayin timotzei. So that's what's called Inif and Yesh, like Abidi Inif and Keser. Well, what's going to happen is that Chokmah is going to be oila to its shorish in Keser, and just like Keser is Ayin Mamish, the Hainu, the Shlilas Kol HaMatzias, no Adarabah, Dafki Dveikis Vizkalalas, in Elikus, and therefore Chokmah is going to be Chokmah, but it's going to be in that madrega of the ayin of Keser. In other words, the Indian of Elikus, how it makes everything just bottled by Matthias Legamri. Not an Asinus mocking to a beginning of a koyach like in the Seder of the koyachas or the Sfiras, no, even ayin korol b'toich HaKeser mami. But he said the Inif and Chokmah is going to be ayin the Keser. And that's the chiddush of this whole piece, and that's a tremendous chiddush of Chassidus Chabad, that Li'osid, we're going to be masig, and we're going to understand all the inyonim as we are human beings. That's the whole uftu. The Inif and Tchias HaMeisim, B'Shleimus Amuvan, that we're going to be masig all these inyonim in the koyachas as they are. And remember, the diuk is not that Chokmah is just going to become bottled, and there's only going to be Gilei HaKeser. Now, the Indian is a Chokmah will be oile into Keser, and being as it is bottled over there, it'll still be a way of giving messages into the human mind. It'll still be a source of ashpur to people how they are. In other words, that everything will just go up into a tremendous madrega, and as we explained the other night, really that's the way it is. BMS, that Chokmah and Bin, all those inyonim are just different faces within the Gilui of the Oinik Eloki, which is the shorish of the whole Nishava HaKodesh Baruch Hu Liyas Lo Yidira B'Tach Atoinim. And I said that Rabbi, that's the whole amazing chiddush how it's going to be, and that's because it will be Chokmah in the madrega of Ayin Keser Ve'iyah Hagilui Lamata Mata Mamish. Since that's the case, that really everything's going to remain Kamoshahu, but it's just going to go up into a level that it'll be makabel from the Amitis in a bittel b'metzias. Well, that means that things will be a metzias, but they'll be absolutely teilim, klulim, in Gilei Elikus, ulechol echad ve'echad mi Yisrael, b'li shum chiluchi madregas klau. Pile, ploid, that when there'll be that gilui, then lamata, there won't be any differences, at all. I mean, but that lechera is a tremendous tamiyah, and a tremendous tamer to say anything like that. So let's be patient for a little to see where that leads us. This is what the Novi said. This is the famous pasuk in Yirmiyahu Hanavi. But Yirmiyahu Hanavi, he was the Emes Hanavi of the Churban and the Geula, because he went through the whole Churban of the Bayis Rishon, and all the tzaras that were after the Churban, all the terrible matzovim, and the whole Indian, with the guns and dois, and he tried so hard to save the situation. Yirmiyahu Hanavi, and he was the one who brought back some of their Seros Hashvotim. He brought back some of them, but he wasn't able to bring back only a fraction of them back into Eretz Yisrael, the whole Arif Sha'inyan. And he nonetheless was able to see beyond all that, and he was able to see the Gilui of the Osid. And amongst all the tzaras, he also gave certain of his nevuahs to what it's going to be like when Mashiach will come. And he says, Yirmiyahu Hanavi, v'lo yilamdu ish esri ehu. There won't be a seder anymore of one person teaching his friend or his neighbor. Ki kulam yedu oisi. Because all of them will know me. What know means to be makusher in something. They'll just automatically have tremendous appreciation of me. What that will take their whole beings. What that's a concept of bittul b'matiyah. And he says, in our limud, or nowadays if we do teach one the other, einu shayach rak b'chinas hachokma haboa mi ayin le. Yes, that's shayach where we talk about the inyan of chokma, which comes me Ayin into Yesh, Bepinas Gidel Utsmicha Mimahus Lama, who's like we saw earlier, that it comes from the Krech Samech Sheb Chochma, yeah, what that's the union of Chochma Gluya, or upon him after the Parsa in Chochma Stimua. And that then changes through that parser from one mahus to another, from an oil which is gilui elakus pilvad into an oil which is already shot to the hisavas and to become a mochel matziyas. Sheyesh b'zeh chiluchi madreges bekatnasu. There you have taka different madreges. There you got neshamas that they are aware and neshamas that they're less aware, and some will need more teaching and some will need less teaching. Ubezeh shaykh limud Roshei Alfei Yisrael. What the leaders, of all the different groups of Yidden, Roshei Alfei Yisrael, Heimo Hamalamdim Umashpim Lehaker Tanim. They are malamed, they teach and they give down the ashpah to the people who are not Roshei Alfei Yisrael, but they are Katanim. Like the Alter Rebbe brings that lesson, Roshei Alfei Yisrael, and Perek Beis. But I get to the fact that in all generations there are these leading neshamas, but they derive from the very early neshamas, how they were beracious, the tales of Am Yisrael, and they are nimtza b'kol doya v'doya. Well, that's the Talmud Chacham Shebedur, or the Talmud Chachamim, and Rabbim, and they give over, and they are mashpia the inner knowledge and elikus to the smaller people, the people who are in the madrega of Katanim, the Gabi them. And that's the whole opinion in Perek Beis over there. Ve'etchem inyan al-limud ushe mismayet or me madrega, when you teach somebody, then the way you understand it, and you give it over, it goes down from stage to stage. Kamoiba mashpia umekabel, hari lo kol ha'oyer kamoishahu bahamashpia nimshoch elamekabel. Not everything that the mashpia has in his appreciation, it goes over to the receiver, to the Talmud, as his movement. Because if he were to give over exactly how he understands it, the Mila Madreg of his understanding, then the Makabel would be misbalbel, and he would lose his whole ability to learn. And therefore, the Bezeh Seichel Gufa, that in each particular seichel in its own right, Yoidea HaMashpia B'chinas HaPnimis Shaboy, Shezeh I Efsha Le'iskabel Klal Ela Mekabel, Ki Im B'chinas HaChitonius Levot. Well, that's going on in all the Klali Hashpah, that are Emes HaMashpia, then he understands and he has in his mind the in of the Pnimiyas of that whole Hasoga. But if we were to give over that Hasoga B'Pnimayusay right from the beginning to the Makabel, then the Makabel would be misbalbel from that, and he would have a certain shvira in his abilities to understand, and that would be mavalbel him. And therefore he has to give it over to him only in a form of choinias lavad, of what's well known that that's not just stam another inyan, or a inyan which won't help him come to the pnimius. No, the chitzonius is a ma'ain of the pnimius. And therefore we see that the Gemara brings in Masechta Tainis and Od Makayimais, that you must always be malamed the Talmud b'derek kitzora, what they indicate that the chitzonius is really only a kitzur. In other words, it's got in itself all really the message of the pnimis, but it's hidden in certain what you might call developable, able to develop lavushim. In other words, that everything has to come through a lavush. The lavush can help you towards that inyan. And therefore it's called chitzonius, but it doesn't mean something else. It just means a form of kitzur and lavush, which will help the makabel to grasp that inyan and gradually come to the pnimiyah. Ukenaida, the chitzonius shebe'elyain nasa pnimius el hatachtoin. When you have mashpia makabel, and particularly ila va'olo, it's one on that which is only the chitzonius by the elyain. In other words, the inyan for netzach Yesod or Netzachid Yesod V'Malchus, how it is by the Elyon, what that's called his Chitonias, well, that becomes the Chochmah Bina Das Eitel the Makabel. In other words, that what is only the what you might call the noivelis, it's only the leftovers of the Chochmah or the Mashpia, well, that becomes the Pnimius, how it is in the Moyach or the Makabel. Well, like we pointed out, since it's an emes Chitonias, it's a real Chitonias which was made up by the Rav and given over in the right way, then it's possible that I'll add a Bayan Shnin after 40 years, or hopefully much less than that. If you work really hard, then it's possible for the Makabel to come to the emes appreciation of the Pnimiyas, because the Chitonias is given to him in a way that he'll eventually come to the Panim. Over the way it is in the Seder of the Limud is that which is only the Chitonias of the Elyon, Dahainu, only those aspects which he can be Mashpia, Dahainu, Neitzachoid, and Yesod, well, they go down and they become the Chochmah Bina V'Das El Atachton. V'zehu b'chinas ha-Chochmah De'achshov. Well, that's the Chochmah the way we have it now. Sho'ifen Hamshochoso Hu b'chinas Tzimtzum Dakim. It's come all the way down from the Chochmah, how it is B'sherish ha-Chochmah in Chochmah Stimoya, and even Noid L'maylam is there. It's come down, even from Tzimtzum, meaning b'derech miut, from one level to the other. Hu b'chinas miut, lessening of the Gilui, v'yirida mimadrega lama, drega that the Chitonias Sheba'elion, and Kol Madrega becomes the Pnimis to the Tachtin, so it goes down stage after stage. V'hainu lefisha hamshochas ha-Chochmah mim koiro, hu gam kein b'chinas limud. He said, and that is because even the Chochmah, before it begins its descent down into Histaushlis, even the Chochmah itself, the original Chochmah, which is coming down all that way, it itself came out of its Makkah also in a Oifen Kozeh. And therefore, it's able to give itself down in that way. And like we saw, that Chochmah Dat Silas reveals itself through the symptom of Chochmah Stimor, or Al-Hopan de Parsa, between Atik and Chochmah Stimoya, and then Chochmah Stimoya, the further parts in the Chochmah. So the Chochmah that we are trying to learn, the Ainu, Chochmah Iloah, it itself began its journey also in the form of a Tzimtzum V'Yerida. Therefore the whole thing goes, B'Seder Kazeh, Kol Hazman, down until it reaches the Talmud or the Tachton, how he is, Lamata. And he said, Kamoisha Kosuv, and like it is written, Alefcha Chochmah, I will literally instruct you Chochmah. Now that's a pasuk in, how do you call it, in Eoy, right near, I say near the end of Eoy, it's well, towards the end of Eoy. What's going on? The whole story, how Eoy, he became very embittered, and he had all sorts of kashi years. You know the whole story, and then there were people came in to what's called comfort him. It's the famous expression in the old English quip. You call people Job's comforters. Have you ever heard of Job's comforters? Never heard the expression? No, you guys. I mean, Americans don't talk English like that. They talk some sort of, and Canadians. And South Africans, I don't know, they talk some sort of weird vernacular, what they talk. And Australians, well, I got to be careful about that. If I start, besmirching the Australians, then I'm going to get myself into difficulties. Maybe the answer is that I'm not really an Australian anymore, but anyway.
No, you're always Australian.
He's not going to like that. So therefore, he said, Gam came b'chinas limud, Kamoisha Choshka, Alefcha Chochmah. Now that's a very fascinating thing, because Eoy was just given at this particular point, Eoy was given forth a new series of, like you might call, embittered tainas, and there's got this a relatively young member of the people who came to argue with him. He's called Eliyahu, is his name, and he says to Eov, he prepares Eov, and he says, if you'll just listen to me, just get yourself ready. And one of the expressions that he uses is, Ayin ator, if you will be mamish like Ayin, then Alefcho Chochma. In other words, it's a very fascinating Siddish statement. He says to him, if you will make yourself mamish Ayin, then Alefcho, I will teach you Chochma, I'll reveal you Chochma. So we see that in order to get the Gilui of Chochma, you got to first of all admit that you're Ayin. And what the Rebbe is being medactic here is that he says, Alefcho Chochma, from where? From Ayin. In other words, I'll teach you the whole Mokif of Chochma. I'll teach you how to know what is the whole way the Chochma reveals itself. And then being as you are, a very informed, very wise person, you'll know yourself what to do. I say that's how Siddish understand. He says, Alefcho. Now that's very fascinating that the word Aleph is a word in Lashon Kodesh, or actually in Aramaic more, that it means to teach or to instruct somebody. And therefore you have the word Ulpan, which means a place of studying or learning, people teaching other people something. And therefore we have in the Gemara also the Lashon Ulpana, which can mean the idea of learning or understanding. And other such bituim which occur both in the Mikra and in the Lashonos of our sages. So here we see the word Alefcho, Alefcho Chochma. So the word Alefcho is a future term. So therefore the first Aleph is the future of the verb, Alefcho. So the root is Alefcho, Aleph, I will teach you. So the Rebbe, it comes out of his here that the Mokeh, the Gilui of Chochma from its Mokeh, is in the form of a Aleph, because the word I will teach you, which is indicative of how the Inyan of Chochma is going to be Miskala, is the word Aleph. And the word Aleph is Aleph. Is assuming that the Aleph itself is connected with the Inyan of the Gilui of Chochma. And that fits in nicely. The Aleph happens to be the first letter of the whole Aleph base, and it's well known. The Chochma, Eloi, the Shurish of the Dibur, the Shurish of the Oasis, which they later become the Asura Maimoras, with the whole Arichas Ha'inya. So it says the Rebbe, Da'alefcho hu idin ha limud. I will instruct you with the Inyan of Limud. V'hainu, she'amshocha de Chochma, the etzim amshocha Chochma itself, he rak mepchinas achroinu shebe keser bepchinas toimeach levad. Like we learned earlier, that Chochma Eloah, as a queer which can be called Chochma, comes from the Inyan from toimeach levad. Shezeh Inyan halimud. Well, that's the whole Inyan of teaching. V'zehu ha'alef da'alefcho. Of the word alefcho, that is the aleph. So we're going to deal briefly with this next passage, and then tomorrow evening we'll develop on a more. Because I want to sort of move over now to the other shiur. I have a few announcements, a few things I've got to talk about quite urgently. V'inyan, so the Rebbe says, Tehine, where are we? V'shezehu ha'alimat, zehu ha'alif de'alefcho. Tehine tzir ois alef. Ahu yud b'roish, v'yud b'seif, at the bottom there's a yud, v'kav be'emta, and in the middle there's a line. V'inen ha'yud, hu b'chinas atzimtzum kenakuda, because a yud is like an akuda. I mean, when you write ordinary handwriting, you can make a yud almost just a little dot. Yeah, atzimtzum kenakuda. V'hu shenis'alem ha'oyer ha'koidem, she'ena meya b'gilui klal. In other words, that the whole Inyan of a Yud and a Kuda indicates that everything we had before is now in a state of Hele. It's not in a state of Gui. That's one Inyan. He said, and then he says, V'gam anakuda koileles b'chinas ha'er she is galeb. In other words, that the Nakuda's got itself two, as it were, states or inyanim. On the one hand, the Nakuda represents that all that's been before, all the wondrous Gilui that was before has now become Aleph. nakuda. And yet, nonetheless, in that nakuda is hidden all the things that are later going to come. Yeah, are later going to come out. So it would appear as we go along, hopefully tomorrow evening, we're going to have to discuss it at some length. And we're going to see that really two forms of nakuda. That there's one nakuda and there's like another nakuda, but they're all describable clearly as nakuda. And the first Indian of nakuda is that all I've got left is just a nakuda compared to everything I had before. Now there's another Indian that nakuda is also is koilin in itself. Everything that I meant by making that tzimtzum or that helim, I had a kavanah. It was in order to want to give it over to the limited mekablim who couldn't possibly mekabel the oil the way it was before the tzimtzum. So come to this, that the nakuda's got two functions, or it's two aspects of it. On the one hand, it indicates that it's only a nakuda legabi what was there before, and yet it's also the source of giving over everything we want to Hainu, why we made that old tzimtzum to produce a possibility of something being eventually able to go over to the Mekablim. So therefore the Rebbe said that first of all, it's a inyan from Tzimtzum, She'ena Mea Begiloi. V'gam, and furthermore, he said the Nakuda has in itself, Koi Beklolas, all of the earth which is going to be Misgala. V'ainu, Shehu Rak Nakuda Achas Me'eraku. Now he explains it in a little bit more detail. One aspect of the kuda is that it's only a nakuda achas legabi de oyer hakodem v'gam zeh, and in addition to that, mischamtzeim bechinas nakuda. In other words, that nakuda itself undergoes a inifan tzimtzum even further. Well, from that it's mashma that there are two tzimtzumim here. There's a tzimtzum legabi de oyer hakodem, the atzmi, to a nakuda, and then there's a further Indian that the nakuda in itself, as it were, retreats in itself to a greater intensity of helem, hiding in itself all that it can now give out. So it's got in itself certain things, to hide the leftovers from, but it undergoes a further tzimtzum prior to its becoming a mashpia. That's a very fascinating thing we're going to see tomorrow. Ukidu abinyan nakuda kav sheta. It's one of the three madregas that are brought down in Kabbalah, that you have nakuda, kav, and sheta. What nakuda means, etzem dika gilui of a nakuda. Kav means a development into a line, and shetach means area. That how you disperse after the line, you be a mispashet into an area. Shemetchila tzimtzum hanakuda. In other words, mashma the tzimtzum in the nakuda itself. Ve'achachach hu b'chinas hamshoches ha'ora mi hanakuda. And that's b'chinas kav kotza. Well, that's the end of the line. The kav. And then later on you have the yud at the bottom, well, that's called shetach. He's already the kei achroina. He's already the beginning of the espashtas out into the makabel. Ve'esh loima shezo b'chinas hamshocha the cyrus shu k'moi kav. Like we've had earlier, we could say that kav and the cyrus is one Indian. In other words, that in order to get from that tzimtzum of the nakuda down into a gilu, which is going to eventually reach the makabel, you have to go through Cyrus. Well, we've been through that before, but we'll talk about that also tomorrow. That Cyrus are more the Indian of tzimtzum, but they have in themselves opinions. Why much cause b'terah be'abiyah the vayetze be'inen vovin ve'yuden the yud gimel tkunei dikno. Yud gimel tkunei dikno is the yud gimel mitzvah orachamim, and it's called the Indian of the beard. As is one on dikno is the Aramic for a beard. There are 13 literary attributes of the beard, which are the 13 midas horachamim. They're connected with vovin, with yuden and vovin. And that's the Indian of Cyrus. The vovin over there also called Cyrus, because the Cyrus, they grow from a little sort of a hole, and they go out into a longer kav. And the little sort of hole, that's Indian of Chok Milah. That's cured guma. It's a little hole in the skin, but that's like Chok Milah. And then it comes out of that a kav, that's the Indian of Cyrus. Similarly here, first of all, there's Indian of Tzimtzum Anakuda, and then afterwards there's Nimshach a kav. But that's the Indian of the Saira. Vayud shebesof ho aleph yesh loima shezo b'chinas chokma. Well, that's mamish chokma geluya, and from there you can already get down to the kabbalah. Once you got chokma geluya, וזהו גם כן האלף דלאלופים. In the Gimel, the Ragman's written Neitzer Chesed La'alofim, which is Aleph in plural, Ukeneda the Tikkun La'alofim, as who as Cholos Bechinas Pnimi, Akamesh Kosev, V'Teireh, V'du Amas V'Tona Rabban Ner Chanukah. Well, we'll see about that, Amir Tashem, in the future and developing episodes. And therefore he says, "V'hainu she'amshocha b'chochma hu b'chinas upena v'limud she'zeh alidei tzimtzum." Now the whole inyan, how chochma itself comes about, is through the shorish u'mokeh of chochma. There's the inyan of tzimtzum v'yerida, first of all nakuda, and afterwards sayra, which is another form of tzimtzum, as we'll go into. No, it's the same idea. Why it's called in Aramic? Because maybe it means to suggest that everything goes down.